from city staff at 5.78. The budget guidelines we used in the development of the 2018 to 2020 capital or operating budget was we took the position that was presented to Council from 2017 and used that as a starting point for 18 and 19, and 2020 would be a new year. So the draft position from the 2017 budget was a starting point of 4.29 in 2018 and 5.48 in 2019. And we were looking at maintaining the existing service levels. In the development of the budget, what we do is we do what we call 4 different areas we look at. We look at the base adjustments, which are adjustments that are required to the existing service levels. We look at growth, which is anything that is above the existing service levels. We look for one-time. These are non-recurring expenditures, so this could be tables, chairs, anything that is just in the current year budget and doesn't have to reoccur in the following year. And then we bring in the operating impacts from capital. The starting point from last year, as we had from Council at the January 24th, 2017 budget, was a starting point of 4.29 for 18 and 5.48 for 2019. And if you look at that, the original starting point, roughly, if you look at the red and blue, which we call our base services, was about 1.87 and 2.66 in 18 and 19. If you look at what we have before you as a draft budget, you'll see that we're looking at a 5.78, 5.68, and 5.61. Staff, when we had the original submissions that came in, we were looking at a 7.63% increase as once everybody had tabled their budget requests. The review by staff eliminated roughly $1.5 million from this budget, or 1.85%, bringing it down to 5.78. The black line going across there denotes what is the base service level of the budget, which is maintaining the existing service levels. You'll see it's 2.83, 2.91, and 2.59. The components of the base you have there is there's other base, which is some changes in various expenditure categories of 0.1%. Our utilities continue to grow like everybody that has a household, or hydro, gas, and water continue to go up, and it's a 0.3 roughly % increase as a result of that. And then wages are 2.44. And the wage increase reflects the 2 collective agreements plus the minimum wage implications from Bill 148, plus being a living wage community. The purple box there indicates operating impacts from capital of 0.27, and these are the small ones that we talked about earlier on. We have the growth in one-time of 0.39. These are the non-recurring items that occur and then disappear. The special projects is 2.29, and that's the post office and Station 6. So those are the 2 costs related to the opening of those facilities. If we look what we've done, and we've done a multi-year budget for a few years now, so we're tracking the changes from the multi-year budget as a starting point to where we are as a draft budget. You'll see we started at 4.29 in 2017 for 2018. We've increased it by about 1.49, bringing it to 5.78. So we've been tracking the major changes in here. So you'll see the total salary increase and total benefits are increased by about $1.2 million above what we previously had forecast. That's a result of some new collective agreements we had. We put back in the non-union wage freeze, and we had some add-backs for pub ed and prevention within fire that were previously removed in 2017 out of the 2018 budget. The ID exchange is increasing by an additional $221,000. We had some operating impacts from capital for a couple projects that we didn't have in the budget last year, which is the Fire CAD project that we spoke about, and there was some other minor licensing and software stuff for about $3,000. We had some growth in one-time requests for about $110,000. There's funding for external growth, which was the heritage funding, and some neighborhood associations for about $24,000. Technology services for about 26.6 for additional licensing costs. We had some one-time expenditures for inclusion services, archives, and election. Because 2018 is an election year, we true up the cost of the forecasted budget for an election, so we try to budget annually a contribution to a reserve fund, and in the final year, when we run the election, we true that cost up. It's either higher or lower than we forecasted it to be. And then we had some one-time purchases that were identified that we needed to improve our carbon monoxide monitoring system, and there was a roll-up door in the fleet that needed to be dealt with for about $60,000, and then there's some other minor growth in one-times totaling $32,000. As we indicated, where the budget came in, we looked at reducing the capital levy contribution by $453,000 or 0.55. We were going to try and phase out the draw on the rate stabilization. It's about $460,000 a year we draw from rate stabilization. We were trying to phase that out over 2 years. Where the budget was sitting, we reduced that to try and phase it out over 3 years. And then there were some other minor adjustments here and there totaling about $123,000. So that's the combination of what built to the 1.49 from the previous budget forecast to where we are today. We did the same thing for 2019, being the second year of our 3-year forecast in 17. We had originally forecasted 5.48, and we had to go up by 0.2% to 5.88. Again, the total wage increase, because of our collective agreements and the settlements, were slightly higher than we had anticipated when we did the forecasting. It's 430. The ID exchange is another 157,000. There's some operating impacts from capital. When we get into the projects, we realized that we didn't need those. We eliminate those impacts coming forward. There's some growth in one-times for 102. And again, because we reduced the contribution to capital in 2018, it has a ripple effect through the various years of the budget going forward. And then there were some other minor changes for 0.1 or 87,000, making up the 0.2% change. If we look at the composition of how does the 5.78 stack up, we have base adjustments of 2.83, and that's to maintain all of our existing services. We have growth in one-time of 0.39, and we have capital impacts of 2.56. The main drivers there are the fire station, 6 at 1.61, and the post office at 0.48, and some other impacts at 0.7. Within the other impacts is some of the CAD implications and some various other software licensing fees. If you look at that impact on an average household assessed at $323,300, it'd be about $79.87 would be the impact of that increase. If we look at the operating budget, we're looking at a total expenditure of about $125.4 million in 2018. Of that, salary and benefits is the main driver of that, or 54% of that spend, or $67.8 million. We have the contribution to capital, which is at $8.8 million or 7%, and that's our money that we set aside into the capital program every year to rehabilitate our existing infrastructure and keep it going. And you saw earlier from the infrastructure gap that's not got us to the full funding of where we need to be based on the assets that are currently owned. The library is at $8.2 million or 7%. We have programs and supplies at 7.5 or 6%. Contract services at 7.5. A majority of that is within our IT area. For hardware and software is the big area we spend a significant amount of money, is 6%. So those 5 categories alone account for about 80% of our overall spend of the budget. And within the other category, there's about 8 other categories that fall within there. It's our debt servicing costs, our equipment, maintenance, repairs, and operations, our utility costs, there's funding to external organizations, our IT, our insurance, facility maintenance, and then there's some other minor expenditures and various other accounts. If we follow up with that and we look at the major components down below of how we raise these out of the property tax base, 87.1% comes from our property taxes, or 69% of our overall revenue comes out of the property tax base. We have $12.1 million, or 10% of that revenue comes out of user fees. And other revenue is 21%, which is 26.2, and that would be our building permit fees and fines and penalties and parking tickets and various items of that nature. What we've tried to do this year in developing the budget is to link back to our strategic plan. So we've gone and we've developed 7 core service areas and tried to tie these back to the strategic planning documents that have been approved by Council. So the first category we call corporate management, getting stuff done. It costs about $508 to the average taxpayer on an annual basis. Public safety, $402. Things to do, which is recreation, $283. Getting around or transportation, $153. Environmental and nature, $48. Jobs and growth, which is economic development, $35. And infrastructure, $34. So if you look at an average home that gets a bill, the city's share of that bill is about $1,462 on an average home of $323,800. And for each of these 7 core services, through the boards over here, we've identified various programs and services that are itemized within each of those services to give you a cost for the various services that are provided in each of those categories. The other thing is we were looking at the property tax breakdown. So based on where the city is going forward on an average home of $323,300, they'd be looking at a bill of about a little over $4,000, of which about 49% would be representative of the region, which is about $2,000, about $600 for education, and about $1,500 goes to fund all of the city services that we provide. If we look at the tax revenue breakdown, so what categories of the property taxes are paying the share of that tax levy of $87.1 million, about 69% comes out of the residential farm and multi-tenant properties. Industrial accounts for about $7 million or 8%. Commercial office and shopping about $20 million or 23%, and then there's some other managed forests and pipelines that are about 0.16 or so small it comes out to 0%. I just wanted to provide an update for council as to where we're sitting with our rate stabilization reserve. This is the one that we use for unforeseen circumstances in the city to fund. So if we look at this, we had come to council in October, I believe it was, with a report that indicated we might experience a deficit of $223,000 in 2017. So we'd be drawing that out of the rate stabilization. Would leave you a balance of about $2.9 million left in the reserve fund after that draw occurred in 17. If we look at the 18, 19, and 20 draws, at the end of those 3-year budgets, we'd have about 2.2 left in that reserve fund for future use. I was just trying to give council an idea of sort of where our city debt sits. We've heard a lot of discussion around the debt limits and the city's ability to borrow. So what I try to do is put out some information here. So if you look at the tax base column there, we have a policy that says we can only borrow up to 10% of the cap on the operating. So 10% of our own service revenue is the maximum that we could borrow for debt. So currently we have about $16.5 million outstanding on city-issued debt, and then we'd have availability under that program to borrow another $76.5 million in debt, assuming a 5% interest rate and a 10-year term would allow us to go out and issue $76 million worth of additional debt. In that, also annually, the city is redeeming approximately $3 million of principal annually on the outstanding debt of $16 million. The other column is the water, which is our rate-based budget. In there, the policy set by council is 15% of own source revenue, so 15% of the revenue coming out of the water and wastewater budget. The current debt outstanding is about $6.2 million. The term there is normally a 15-year term we do for water and wastewater. Based on the policy, we could borrow an additional $96 million. So there's plenty of room for the city for any of the future capital we have going on to borrow. The little pie in the bottom tries to give you an idea of what the provincial cap is. So the provincial cap sets it at 25% of our own source revenue, which gives us a debt load quite significant. So in relation to that, we have about 5.25% or so of the capacity outstanding on that. So there's plenty of room based on the policy from the province on that. So we've gone over the policy, and if you look at the future year capital projects that are within the 10-year capital program, there is a few that have additional debt to be debentured. There's a capital project for projected back to the river for 1553 King Street for Dover to Bishop, $1.6 million. There's some Galt Streetscaping Phase 1 of $3 million. We have the Riverside Dam in the budget at $7.5 in 2020. The multiplex is in the budget currently in 2020 at $40.7 million, and there's a 2021 for the second half of the Galt Streetscape for $3 million. So we're looking at potentially issuing additional $55.8 million in debt through the 10-year capital budget that was before you earlier. So at the roadshow and subsequent to the roadshow, we've gone back and we found some additional potential savings for it. We now have our final closed assessment roll, and we got about 0.25% more in assessment growth this year. So we came in just around the 1%, or 189.9 is additional revenue. There's an operating impact for the street lighting project that I spoke about earlier that can be removed out of there. It's not required for 245.1. There's the living wage. Since we did the budget, the living wage increase for 2018 has come in higher than what we had in the budget, so it's going to cost us an additional $48,000. And then we did receive confirmation on a grant that we received from the province, and we're going to receive an additional $20,000 on that. So those total off to be about a 0.51% reduction on the opening numbers. So the budget number that is before you is 5.27. If you were to take the 5.1 off the 2.83, we'd be down around 2.3% or 5.3% as a starting point, or 5.27 as a starting point. 2.83 less the 5.1 is about 2.3635 as a starting point on the base service level for that, and then you'd add on the operating impacts and the one-times to get up to the 5.27. And with that, I'll open up for any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Are there any questions of Mr. Fairweather in his presentation? Any questions? I do have one, Steve, and that was when you showed the slide that said, what services do your 2018 dollars get? And you had the bar graphs, and you said getting around transportation was $153 per household. Can you explain that? Because I know we have regional transit, so I was drawing the question there.
It'd be on the storyboards over to the side here. I don't have those right in front of me, Councillor Mann. The storyboard over here has each one of these broken down by service category in there, so I'd have to go over and pull the board. I could if you'd like.
That's okay. Are there any questions of Steve? Councillor Devine.
Yes, through the chair. Mr. Fairweather, we have the pages aren't numbered, but anyway, one of the pie charts you have here, City of Cambridge operating budget expenditure summary of $125 million. Right, no, not that one.
That's the revenue
That's
side?
it right there.
Yeah.
That's it right there.
Okay.
Do we have a breakdown? We have $7.5 million in contracted services. Do we have a breakdown of that?
Yep, we have those listed.
I would like to see that.
Okay.
The breakdown.
Sure.
And another question. We've had, this year, we've had a number of trips to various parts of the world, Dubai, Boston, et cetera, et cetera. What part of the budget do they come out of? I'd like to have a look at those.
They'd probably be in the other category within the budget, depending on what the nature of them was, or they could be in the salary and benefits, depending.
Okay. Do you have a breakdown of those
the individual trips?
Yes.
Yeah,
So I'd like to see the cost of that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Fairweather? So I know prior to the lunch break we had talked about coming back with some different scenarios, and I know that there wasn't enough time really over the lunch hour to come up with anything, especially when we look at if we're looking at a budget increase of 3%, because in your presentation 3% would be just doing what we're doing now and nothing else, because I think you said that for all intents and purposes, Station 6 in the library would be about 2.5% over and above, which takes us to our 5.7.
Yes.
So if we want to continue doing things just the way we are, with no growth, no future growth, nothing else, we would be at 2.83 with salaries and the basics of doing things.
Less the 5.51, so you'd be down at 2.32.
And in that case, we would have an empty post office or library, and we'd have an empty fire station. These buildings would be complete, but they would sit empty.
Yes.
And so what we've done is we've asked staff to report back on a number of different scenarios, and I think we said what would 3% look like. I think Councillor Amata had suggested 3%, and I think we know what that would look like. But I think we also suggested a couple of other scenarios, and I think it was 4.5, 4.75. And so I want to open that up and see if there are any other scenarios that we want staff to take a look at, because we have 5.78, 5.21 is too high. I think we all sitting around the room here feel that, and we know that we have got to come up with other reductions. It's going to be difficult, folks, because staff have already come up with 1.5 million in cuts, and we're asking them to come up with other cuts that will show us 3%, 4.5%, 4.75. Is there any other scenarios that we want to ask for? Because I think what we have to do is we have to ask staff to take these scenarios away and come back with them so that we have something that we can look at and make a decision based on what services, and I think it's going to come down to what services are we going to lose if we're going to get to some of those different scenarios. Is there anything else that we want to ask staff to look at? Mr. Price.
Mr. Chairman, if you leave the old post office empty, there's still a cost on a monthly basis of over $56,000. So even if you leave it empty, it's still going to be a hit on the operating budget.
Thanks for bringing that to our attention. Any other scenarios that we want to ask staff for? Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask staff if they can give us an idea of how much time they need to be able to present scenarios that would be 4.75, 4.5, and 3%. Sorry, Mr. Dyke, I'll ask you to address that.
Thank you, Councilor Mann. I think in fairness to do the proper analysis and impact summary for council, if we were to move our meeting schedule for this Thursday to next Thursday, that would give us the time we need to provide the level of information for council. And one thing I would also add too is just what we're looking at doing is we can pull the numbers together faster than that, but also have to identify the impact of those changes and what they would have either on user groups or contracts we have with the city. So that's why we're asking for the extra time. I think it's also in fairness going forward. I mentioned at the start of this morning with respect to the need to do a proper assessment of the service delivery methodology of the municipality. And I think that one of the things that we would recommend or request of this committee forward to is that part of the direction be that we begin the process for the service review through into 2018 for implementation in 2019.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dyke. So we need a week to be able to come back with what those scenarios will look like, and at that time we can talk about the recommendation for service review. Go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to mention. And so by pushing it out by a week, would also recommend, we're supposed to be at council on December 11th with a recommended budget December 11th. I'd recommend that be pushed out to December 19th. That way we have sufficient time for the public. Any changes to the budget that would impact user groups for the public, there'll be sufficient notice of the public to represent at the December 19th council meeting. It's supposed to give them 4 days to respond.
Thanks, Mr. Dyke. And so what we have is cancel this Thursday's budget meeting, put it off to next Thursday. I think that is December 7th. So it would be December 7th would be our next meeting, and we'll send notice out to everybody. And then the council meeting, would be a special council meeting on December 19th. And so we would come together December 7th and try to come up with a recommendation for council that would be presented to council on December 19th. Any questions?
Or just a quick comment, if I may,
Yes.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. There is something I would like staff to look at in the long term, and it's a long-term thing. I don't expect an answer on this by next week or the week after or even this year, but I think given the fact that money is tight, it would be good to look at new ways to bring in revenue. And I know that we're already trying to find alternatives. And I give credit to Mayor Craig for his fight with the province, for a portion of the HST without raising the HST, like reallocating some of those funds. And it makes sense because municipalities have a lot more responsibility than they have in the past. And I always explain to my constituents that Hesper Road is no longer a provincial highway. It's looked after by municipal government. Obviously the region and City of Guelph, it's looked after by the City of Guelph and County of Wellington outside of that and so forth. So the idea that I wanted to put forward, and I think we might be already possibly looking at this, or at least for some things like the theater we obviously voted on, but I'd like to explore the option, and I'm going to be very careful with the suggestion because it does have the potential to be controversial if it's not done properly. I'd like to explore naming rights more for city facilities. I'm not suggesting renaming City Hall or renaming our parks or renaming the city. That would be crazy. But why not name a fire station after someone who contributes, the highest amount? People don't care who it's named after as long as, obviously not somebody who's committed a serious crime or anything, but generally, actually, just to make you all laugh, and this is true actually, down by Windsor, just outside of Windsor, the highest bidder was a sex offender, and they had to deal with that. That was kind of interesting. But anyways, but in all seriousness, the note that I wanted to make was, could we look at getting our fire stations named? They're in prime locations. Maple Grove Road has a lot of traffic. Franklin Boulevard has a lot of traffic. Can we explore things like that? And how much money would that bring in? And it's got to be done carefully, I get that. But I think we need to be, thinking outside the box in that regard and doing, which we already are in other ways, I guess. But I think it'd be a good discussion to have and to see what we're able to do, what we're able to bring in to help the taxpayers out, right?
Thank you, Councillor, and I'll let Mr. Dyke expand on this because I know we're already going down that road, so good idea. I'll let you expand.
I'll defer to Mr. Bromberg, Mr. Chairman.
Through the chair to Councillor Armada, that certainly is something that we're exploring right now, and we've made a request for proposal to ask consultants to come in and provide us with some recommendations moving forward with exactly that. In light of future projects, in light of exactly what you indicated in terms of looking at alternative revenue streams. So that process is well underway.
Any other questions or comments before we adjourn? Just one thing a couple of things I want to say is that we are asking staff to go back and take a look for $1 to $1.5 million so that we can come up with something that we can take back to council. So this is a significant undertaking that we're asking staff to do. And I just want to recognize that staff have already done all the heavy lifting to get us from 7.35 or 7.45 down to the 5.2, and we're asking them to go back and to take another hard look at how we are going to reduce this budget to something that we can present to council and ask for approval. So I really want to commend them for the work that they've done, because I know that the last little while it has been a significant number crunching day and night, and I'm sure that many people just wake up with numbers flowing through their head all the time. It's a lot of work and it's not an easy task, but we really do appreciate the work that staff have done. And so with that, we will adjourn and meet. Sorry, before we adjourn, we'll let Mayor Craig have his word.
Well, I think too, we got to keep in mind about the public. We all speak for the taxpayer, each and every one of us sitting here, and we all hear different things. I know that when we shut down the Galt Library for a week in the summer, when there was some construction going on inside, in order to save money for a week, we got pummeled by the public for shutting it down for a short time, just so you know. We talked about getting rid of leaf pickup, and again, we heard about it from the public. They weren't prepared to give that up. Soper Park, the pool, same thing. So you got to be careful here. There's a lot of people that want certain things, and there is a price tag to it. I think when we come down to the library in Galt, if I may suggest, it's been 25 years since there's been an expansion. And I think it's crucial that that expansion goes ahead. The other thing with the fire hall, I mean, it's a backup for Hespeler and Preston in terms of safety issues. So that we have to weigh off. So let's be careful here and recognize that we're in a difficult position. We know that, but the taxpayers also have spoken from another point of view too.
And thank you for those comments, Your Worship. We know that the collective agreements that we have agreed to with the respective unions is something that we will always honor. And we know that the community has said that they want a new fire station number 6 and they want the new library. Our decision, and the tough one that we have to make, is how do we bring that in and keep taxes to a reasonable level? So something for all of us to think over the next week, because as you have mentioned, it's difficult. It's difficult to make those tough decisions, but that's why we're here, because we've been. It's incumbent upon us to make those decisions because we represent not only the community but the city as well, and we have to make decisions that the community can live with and that we can present to them as reasonable and acceptable. So the next meeting will be on December 7th at 9 o'clock. We will meet here. And we could do it here. If there are no other questions or comments, then I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Devine, seconded. Councillor Mata.